Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete our fifth of five programs on spirituality and conscious leadership. First, a quick housekeeping. It's daylight savings time in the United States this Sunday, but not in Europe and much of the rest of the world. So just bear that in mind for our Humanity Rising sessions next week. Will keep consistent with the US savings time. And so people need to adjust accordingly wherever you happen to be around the world. As we begin our program today, I want to just frame both the general topic of spirituality and conscious leadership, but also this particular session within the context of what we've been developing over the last 9 months or so on Humanity Rising, and that is the momentous milestone of the US government legislation last December stating that UFOs, now called UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, exist, and that evidence would be forthcoming through the National Archives to the world public starting in 2024. The day before yesterday, that process began. So the entire world is taking in that the greatest government on our planet has announced in law that all government agencies and contracting corporations have to start turning over to the National Archives for public release all the information they've gathered since the Second World War pertaining to UFOs, retrieved alien craft, retrieved alien bodies. And I just happened to be this morning before coming to the office over at the Congress, the House of Representatives, meeting with staffers of congressional reps who were meeting to take the hearings where more and more whistleblowers who have volunteered to testify can be heard. Since the last hearing on July 26th of 2023, when you probably all remember David Grush, the highest ranking intelligence official in the US government, stated categorically that non-human technology, non-human intelligence, is what he called biologics, exist, and that there's been a cover-up. And it was in the immediate aftermath of that that Senator Schumer proposed his Schumer Amendment, the UAP Disclosure Act, which was finally passed, although heavily modified in December of last year, signed into law on the solstice by President Joe Biden. As we at the New Paradigm Institute have been considering what would be the one endeavor that could make the most difference as humanity enters into its extraterrestrial moment. The one thing that we have begun among many, which we'll be describing over the next several weeks during our ET program, is to begin to work with the major world religions and indigenous traditions on not only what they remember, because every single one of them in its origin stories, in its creation stories, has a deep memory that in primordial times, humanity was either created by or had contact with extraterrestrials. In Islam, The Quran teaches that, in fact, we are ETs, that humanity was sent to Earth from another star system. And you can even go to Sri Lanka, where Adam stepped foot on that sacred mountain in Sri Lanka, the first human to enter Earth planetary ecosystem. So all the traditions have this memory, but for the most part, it's been forgotten. And it's because it's been forgotten that the US government and other governments were so singularly successful in the aftermath of the Second World War, when extraterrestrial craft started to appear in numbers, not only in the United States, but in Russia, in China, in India, in Brazil, all around the world. They kept it secret, with a classification even more secret than nuclear weapons technology. And they were so successful that to even talk about ETs or UFOs meant that you were slightly crazy. And now in 2023 and moving into 2024, we are now moving, after 80 years of the most closely guarded secret in the history of the world, we're moving into disclosure. And the world religions, as the receptacle of spirituality, consciousness, that has been their remit on behalf of humanity, to develop over time what it means to be spiritual, what it means to be conscious as we live our lives. And for these great traditions, along with the indigenous traditions, to come into a conscious awareness of the memory that they have safeguarded for thousands of years, to help shape the human narrative around cosmic contact, is, in my view, the ultimate container in our time for spirituality and consciousness and leadership, because the implications of the reality that we are not alone and that civilizations far more advanced than we are have been present and operating on our planet and are seeking to influence, largely through human spirituality and religion, human perceptions, and therefore the human ET relationship as we enter into cosmic awareness cannot be overestimated. It's an extraordinary moment. I can't tell you how exciting it is to be in the epicenter of that movement here in Washington. And so that is something that I thought would be worth considering as we close out our week and we really deal with this deep, deep issue of the future of spirituality and conscious leadership in our species. So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising today. And I would like to now turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who will commence our program. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And thank you all for joining us again today. It's been a wonderful week as we've explored this conversation about spirituality and conscious leadership. As I've shared throughout the week, I hold that we are all spiritual beings. And spirituality isn't just something that we do as part of our day. It's who we are. And we've had a wonderful opportunity during the week to talk about awakening our spiritual core and how might we go about doing that. We've had a chance to explore inner peace and well-being. We've had a chance to discuss yesterday interconnectedness and unity. And so I'm delighted to just acknowledge that as a species, I hold us as adolescents, and we continue to be in the inquiry around, are we evolving or devolving as a species? And can we move from our adolescence into our adulthood? And so I'm just really happy to invite Mirabai Starr and Samantha Sweetwater into the conversation today to explore what is the future of our spiritual evolution as a species. And so, Mirabai, I'd like to start with you and just welcome you to the program today, and welcome your opening comments and thoughts about where is humanity and what is our evolutionary path look like? Are we going to evolve? Are we going to devolve? Or what, from your perch in the world, what's your perspective?
Yes, my perspective is yes. All of the above, and which I think is yours too, Tom, that there's evidence in both directions, that the worst of our human impulses are in full display in the world right now. And it's horrifying. I mean, on a daily basis, in light of what's happening in Gaza, especially, but in other parts of the world where these fires are raging, I am astonished that it's even possible that humans could be behaving the way that we have and thinking in the narrow, constricted ways collectively that seem to be on evidence. And simultaneously, there is this gorgeous, arising, burgeoning, flowering of the best of the human spirit, also available if we look through the eyes of love and curiosity. So I see both. I even question, I mean, this is probably heresy in this circle, but I even question the term evolution sometimes. It's in the sense that it implies a kind of linear trajectory. And I'm not sure that that's the divine reality is more messy and organic than that. And it includes everything. I do a lot with grief, work with people in grief as a spiritual path. And I think that that's grounded in is the basic understanding that when our hearts are broken, they're broken open, and they can contain everything. In other words, reality as it is, the beautiful and the horrifying and the sweet wonder of being alive and the anguish of losing that which we love. So I think it's more circular than linear.
Yeah, thank you. And there's several points there I want to dive into deeper, but Samantha, what about for you? What are your opening thoughts on, are we going to evolve, devolve, or is that the wrong question?
I think it's a great question, and I resonate very much with what Mirabai has said around, and what it seems has been spoken to quite a lot in this context around both devolutionary and higher adaptive impulses being expressed in the human species as a whole. The way I think about where we are right now is that we are co-evolving with our biosphere, as we always have, whether we're starseeds or not. We've been here for quite a while. And our biosphere and our noosphere are in places they've never been before. We're living in a more polluted epistemic media informational environment than we've ever lived in before. We're living in more polluted physical environments than we've ever lived in before. We're living in more urban environments than we've ever lived in before. And all of those things are organismically maladapted to what we are. And I think of that as the core driver in terms of how we end up adapting and selecting for where we're going to go. So I think of the context that we're in right now as a planetary crucible that's both biological and social, that we've created for ourselves, and that is physically, emotionally, and spiritually pressing on us to bring out both our best and our worst. And then we're in the great experiment of what gets selected for, if you look at it in biological terms. And I think one of the things that is very interesting about this conversation is, where is there emergence of a sense of unity, of we all belong to the earth, we're all one species, we all have the same desire for love and the same spectrum of our emotional competency. And then on the other hand, like, where is plurality playing a role in like all kinds of different responses emerging, and singing to each other. And I think both of those are quite exciting in terms of, and also scary in terms of how we're responding to the moment that we're in.
Yeah, and I want to explore more some of what you both have shared. I find for myself, because I'm in this conversation a lot around where is humanity on our evolutionary path, and I appreciate the distinction you made, Mirabai. And for me, it's, as I've shared with our audience before, the documentary film I released in 2020 around the true nature of humanity, that we're hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. I know that's in our wiring, and that's one of my touchstones to, even in the face of all of that's going on in the world, I know what our biology tells us, whether we're talking sociology, psychology, anthropology, that we are hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. I also, my touchstone is that we've got roughly 8 billion people on the planet, and something well north of 7 billion are living in peace, some version of peace on a daily basis. And if I need to, I go to both of those places when I'm faced with some of the challenges and difficulties. And yet, what you were saying, Mirabai, about how we can honor grief and how it can break our heart open. And I'd like to just explore that a little bit more before we shift to some of the other conversations I'd like to have today. And so I'm wondering, Mirabai, would you like to share a bit more about that? I shared with you as we were planning this program today, I'm just finishing up Francis Waller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and exploring grief in its gift that it can provide each of us. And I'm just wondering if there's more there you'd like to share.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I'm sure there's not a single person gathered here today that hasn't experienced a life-changing loss. And in general, in the United States in particular, but I would say in Western culture in general, there is a tremendous grief phobia and grief illiteracy. Mostly traditional cultures, and I know, Samantha, you can probably resonate with this, as can many of you gathered here. Loss and grief and the realities of death are intertwined, braided with everyday life. And in contemporary Western culture, there's just, we set it aside, we pathologize not only grief, but death, like death is some problem that needs to be solved or a mistake. And so I will speak personally, because all of these theoretical abstract concepts sometimes just send us spinning into space. So I've had many losses in my life, which have driven this interest that I have in death and dying and grief and grieving as sacred terrain. But the most powerful was the death of my teenage daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, in 2001, very soon after 9/11. So as I was grieving, she died in an accident, Jenny. As I was grieving with every fiber of my being, I was simultaneously aware that the US was invading Iraq, and that war was, that conflict, that violence, that horror was being unleashed at a scale, shock and awe, that was unimaginable. And mothers like me were grieving the deaths of their children. This was not intellectual for me. In other words, by virtue of my own shattered heart, I recognized that I belong to the net of other mothers, other parents, the web of interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. It wasn't an idea. It was a felt reality. And so my own personal loss connected me to the whole of life, not just other humans, but to the earth herself in a very real way. So I hope that's relevant to what you're asking, Tom.
Yeah, it is. I'm struck by just the timing of your personal loss and your connection with what happened in 9/11 and the invasion in Iraq. And I look at not to minimize the loss of what happened here, but the outsized reaction that the U.S. had. We lost 3,500 people in the 9/11, and 250,000 Iraqis lost their lives. And we spent over $2 trillion and counting. And it's, at least for me, it's our inability to deal with grief. It's our inability to deal with loss that results in that kind of excessive reaction to the loss. And I'm just struck by how you chose to process your loss, as opposed to the way our nation chose to deal with the loss.
Yeah, that was very insightful. I think, yeah, that overreaction is also about otherizing. And I think the mother heart, and I'm not just talking about women here, although happy International Women's Day, everybody. But the mother heart that lives in all beings of all genders responds with more love, even in our brokenness. Whereas that sort of masculinized paradigm of dominant culture separates more and more and more and makes enemies. And righteous in our anger. Righteousness is very dangerous.
Yeah, it's why I made the comment that I in my observations over the years hold humanity as in our adolescent stage of development, because we're responding as adolescents do, any of us who've raised children. And Samantha, what's there for you in this moment? What are any reflections on grief and what was there with Mirabai's comments?
I mean, it's beautiful to hear your personal journey, and I think that those stories of being cracked open, being available to the collective experience through the gateway of grief are probably the most powerful and important gateways that we could experience right now. I completely resonated with what you said, Tom, and in that the kind of statement that all war is unmetabolized grief. And sitting with the events of the world right now as, epigenetic, unprocessed grief, and sitting with my own grief on a regular basis of, for me, there's the punctuated, very extreme losses that we experience, and then there's the day-to-day griefs when you're paying attention of the birds you don't hear anymore, or the watershed that's less healthy, or I personally spend a lot of time in a sort of hypervigilance around ecological degradation and various cruelties to animals and losses of species. And how to metabolize that seems to me to be deeply related to whether we evolve or devolve. If we can't find ways to metabolize, to first validate and create cultures that are attentive to and caring of and wise with the ways of grief, then we will never metabolize it. I really and I've spent a lot of time with the teachings of Martine Prechtel around grief, which I find really beautifully collaborative with Terry Patton's with the other pieces of work. And the idea that grief is praise, and to truly experience it can be a kind of ecstasy. That there's a way in which there can be a tendency around mindfulness practices, and Mirabai, I know your work has worked with this a lot, to put it in the category of negative emotion or something that can just be transmuted or meditated through, and that grief isn't that grief is something that is a sacred currency that is reciprocal, and that when we allow it, I love what you spoke to about opening up to the transpersonal experience of that. And then also I've had very deep experience of opening to the reciprocal nature of that and experiencing grief as a currency that in consciousness is reciprocal, that creates the context for the next evolutionary step, for that energy, that information, that love, that possibility to recirculate back into life.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Go ahead, Mirabai.
No, just beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, just a question for both of you. I'm left wondering, and picking up on something you just shared, Samantha, how many more things have to happen in our society, in our culture, and in our world before we can wake up to what you're describing? What more does, how many knocks on the head does humanity need to wake up to what you're speaking to?
We don't know. I mean, that is a great question. And it's an unknown question. And I feel like it's exactly what we're tending in spaces like this, where it's the process of evolution. What you spoke to, Mirabai, is very organic and chaotic. And it's a funny prayer that may things get bad enough that they get better. May things be sufficiently challenging to initiate the wisdom that is necessary to respond effectively. But we don't pray that for we don't wish that for anyone. But there's the answer to that seems impossible to find, and not equally distributed. And it's I think if anything, I have a prayer that it be more equally distributed, because it is the socioeconomic dimension of the unequal distribution is a multipolar trap in and of itself that sets up a dynamic where the wisdom is initiated in those who are available to it, but being at the top of the pyramid can insulate one from that initiation. And so I think about it more in terms of that spectrum of distribution, and what would it take to touch the tech leaders? What would it take to touch the folks with the biggest levers around collective consciousness and the infrastructure that and social structures that drive our world? Yeah.
What
I
about
also
you?
think,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think what Jim brought in around disclosure is a potential superstructure, noetic, a narrative leverage point of, wow, like we're not the only beings here, and we're actually within a much larger circle of interstellar or galactic beings who have their own opinions about what our evolution might look like. That is a kind of tearing away of the veils, apocalyptic potential moment in terms of driving a deeper response.
Mirabai, what about for you? Do you see a way through?
I appreciate what Samantha said about privilege. Well, you didn't use that word, but I don't think. But that's what I am gleaning from what you said, that yes, the tech leaders need to wake the fuck up. Sorry, am I allowed to say that? Yeah.
The FCC
And
will be at your door this afternoon.
and I just did anyway. And we can help, we can push on them. But I mean, I just want to name that probably most of us gathered here in this Humanity Rising space carry privilege, occupy social locations that are different from the people who are struggling to survive every day in the continent of Africa, in South America, and all the places that are where people are oppressed beyond belief. So even if we don't think of ourselves as powerful individually, even if we're women and we feel like we've always been oppressed, there is nevertheless an opportunity that each of us can affirm and say yes to and step up within to use for the greater good, individually and collectively in our community. I mean, yes, the leaders, and so I think it's a much more organic possible prophets, just as all of us are mystics. If to be a mystic means to experience unitive love with the sacred, to be a prophet means to hear the cries of the world, like Kuan Yin, who has ears in all directions and hears the cries of the world, and to respond in whatever way is ours. And if we're expecting ourselves, this is why the notion of evolution troubles me sometimes. If we're expecting ourselves to be some kind of perfected versions of humanity before we feel worthy and capable of stepping up and offering ourselves to the collective, then we're never going to. I mean, if we're reluctant prophets, we're all reluctant prophets. We all have a stutter. We all have some reason that we don't feel ready to act on behalf of creation, the rest of creation. But I think I trust the reluctant prophets way more than I believe in the ones who are charging forth with their swords saying, "Follow me, boys," you know?
Yeah, I witness anytime we have any kind of disaster around the world, and we're certainly, just in the US last year, we had 28 natural disasters that exceeded $1 billion in property loss. The first response that people have is to reach out and help each other. Make sure people have got a place to stay, water, something to eat, comfort, shelter. That is, and we see those examples all the time of that's the innate human response that you're speaking to, Mirabai. But it's not what makes the news. It's not consistent with the narrative that we keep telling ourselves. And so, part of what I'm hearing from both of you is changing that narrative to help humanity see who we truly are. But I'm stuck in this inquiry about we're neither evolving nor devolving. And Mirabai, you've got me. I'll be busy this weekend digging into that a bit more. So, Samantha, back to you for a moment. When you take out your crystal ball and look into the future, what do you see?
Well, I think it's funny that you're asking this question. I watched the second Dune last night, and the Dune narrative, for anyone who doesn't know, has a very strong narrative about prescience and about probable futures and like the narrow path. And I don't know what the future holds, but I do know the power of my seeing of it to help steer it. So I would say the future, and I've had very prescient experience of this, of envisioning coming from a future that I think of as, I call the ancient future, and others call the ancient future, that is a neo-indigenous future that is, and this has also been framed for me by extraplanetary beings, that a civilization isn't civilized. There is no such thing as civilization until a species has found peace with itself and with its biosphere. So that would be an extraplanetary definition of civilization, that we haven't reached civilization yet. And I truly see a future where we reach civilization. I see a future where we have come to realize that the thing that technology needs to do is mediate our relationship with ourselves well, support health, and mediate relationships well. And more importantly, that everything, our culture, our vision of humanity, and our technology needs to nurture our reciprocity with nature. And I mean, that implies extraordinary innovation and development and growth, and a whole different visions of efficiency, effectiveness, value, purpose. It's quite exciting, really. I see a future that is where we're extraordinarily delighted and excited with interspecies relationships in all directions, where we see ourselves very clearly. I think of us as a creator, preserver, destroyer species, as a class of organism, that any of our extraterrestrial friends are also in this class, that they've evolved to the point in the planet's progression of complex life, that they differentiated from complex life, developed complex identities, and the capacity for subject-object refinement, which develops science and technology, and then kind of realize that, oh my gosh, actually interbeing is a priority to all of that, and we need to get really good at relationship and at navigating the between, and at being fully here and fully alive and able to grieve and able to feel and able to do the rainbow of things that human beings do spiritually, emotionally, in consciousness, that is also in biology. And so that's what I see in our future. I see it in life and civilization in our future, or an ancient future civilization. And the prophecy of that is everywhere in Indigenous prophecy, everywhere. You know, I think we are close to the eighth fire in that prophetic framing, where there's a people of all colors, people of all nations, people of all creeds come together, and they say we are lighting the fire of unity for in a recognition that we are one species in service to one planet. I think the narrative that we're one human family is a little problematic, because we have so much healing to do on the level of family, and our families are very, very different. So I've been exploring the narrative that we're one human species, one human community in relationship to the Earth community. I think that memetics may end up being very helpful as a refinement to a lot of consciousness narratives, because that accuracy will create space for the family healing and the family diversity that will be inside the community of humanity in a viable future civilization. So that's what I see for us. And I work with Daniel Schmachtenberger from Consilience Project and Civilization Research Institute, and he calls that the third way, that we could define the devolutionary directions that we could go in. One is towards techno-dystopic control, and one is towards collapse. They're both dystopias, but they take different tracks. And you could say that versions of that exist on our planet already and are not equally distributed. And then the third way is the one where we move into the collaboration that you so beautifully mapped and into response in both personal disaster and collective disaster, and in ecological restoration, reparation in so many ways. in newly distributed kinds of governance where that are truly distributed and truly elevating consensus, like the Audrey Tang experiment. And there's so many iterations to give example to that already being an emergent possibility.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I do want to borrow your crystal ball when you have a moment to lend it to me. Thank you. How about for you, Mirabai? What does the future hold in store for us? We've got you on mute.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, it's me. I have a little cold, so I'm in between. While you're talking, I get to cough. So sparing you. Forgot to turn it back on. I really appreciate your visionary brilliance, Samantha. It's extraordinary and very inspiring. And so my only offering is almost a counterpoint, I hope, in a beautiful way to what you're saying. And really what Jim was talking about in terms of the emerging access that we're going to be granted, we hope, to extraterrestrial wisdom. My approach seems to be, and again, I think it's almost karmic. This is how I was wired, is to reclaim ordinary life as sacred ground. And I am more and more, as a scholar of world religions, dismantling religiosity and reclaiming everyday life as the very domain of connection to the sacred, which I consider to be love itself, and the place where all solutions arise. Right now, I'm looking out my window. It's a cloudy day in northern New Mexico in the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. And there are the first robins of this season are beginning to land in the locust tree outside my window. And outside that way is a magpie drinking from a hole in the frozen pond. And this is God to me. And she is singing from the center of the most ordinary spaces, in changing my granddaughter's diaper, in going to watch Dune at the movie theater and eating popcorn. These are not other than the places where we find the sacred, connect with the sacred, and thereby reconnect with one another as beloved community. And through this reclamation of what is, we get to step into what can be, but not by transcending ordinary life as some kind of messy obstacle that we have to step over.
Yeah,
so my new book is forthcoming in September, is called Ordinary Mysticism, Your Life as Sacred Ground. This is what I'm interested in right now.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful reminder, and happy that you were able to plug your book, or your upcoming book, and hopefully
plug.
we can...
That's such a patriarchal term. Is that really the way you saw what I just did?
Not at all. I apologize for that. I would love to have you back when the book is available to explain more. But what I wanted to share is just that reminder of being reminded from moment to moment what it means to be human, what it means to be alive. And I've had the extraordinary fortune of having spent quite some time with spiritual leaders who have remembrances, memories, clear experiences of having been in human form before and coming back again. And what they share is just what it's like to be back in a body again, and what it's like to live from that place from moment to moment of appreciating all that we have around us. And so for both of you, I'd love to just dive into that a little bit about what are you doing on a daily basis? And Mirabai, just the couple of examples you just gave of the robin and the magpie. What are each of you doing on a daily basis to stay fully present to the magic of life?
Firstly, I can't agree more with you, Mirabai, on the daily sacred. And if in the book I'm writing, which is totally complementary to your book, I'm so excited for your book coming out. The path is the daily path of recognizing the sacred in the world.
Wow. Yay.
The path to that future. So we are converging in that. Daily, I pray, I hike, I dance. I don't do all of these things every day. I seek to be really present in conversations and listening, and to be with the parts of me, like in this conversation, that are nervous or anxious or have a little concern that I might not be as in authority as you, Mirabai. These are all pieces of the honest practice of being fully present, right? And it's day to day and moment to moment, and it lies in very deep emotional intimacy, honesty, and the ability to be present in my interactions in a way, in nonviolent communication of what's actually going on. So it expresses itself as communication practice and diligence of showing up, and little acts of pushing myself to show up more fully. For example, for my friend right now who's recovering from a very significant cancer surgery, and how are we all showing up for her? That's aliveness. That's sacred, It's so beautiful showing up for my parents aging. And then I would also say, on a kind of a cyclical practice level, I work with sacred plant medicine. I work with multiple plants, and the plants have been infinitely helpful for me around the areas where, particularly where it feels to me like part of being fully alive in the sacred daily is about emotional integrity. It does not occur from a place that lacks emotion. It occurs from a place that is present tense with emotion. And that can be very hard to get to. Our default mode network resists that pretty strongly. So for me, the work that I've done with plants has been very helpful for deep trauma healing, but also for the kind of ongoing practice of restoring and committing to full aliveness. I could speak more to that, but I won't at this moment. But I do think it's a useful quadrant of the toolbox collectively. I'd love to hear your answer, Mirabai. I'd love to hear what you do.
Yeah, before you respond, Mirabai, just for a second, there's a question for you, Samantha, in the chat. An inquiry around what is emotional integrity, and if there's more there that you can speak to on that before Mirabai.
There's so many things I could say about it. I also have sense that Mirabai has a lot to say about it, but emotional integrity means starts with acknowledging that emotions themselves are sacred, rather than a problem. Like in so many narratives, they're viewed as a problem, and then there's a kind of default, just they're inconvenient, they're not efficient attitude. And that stultifies emotional intelligence, which then causes us to communicate from places that aren't actually grounded and live from a place that isn't grounded in our body and grounded in our authentic response to life. So emotional integrity for me is about creating various contexts, whether that's psychotherapy or reading Brene Brown's work. Brene Brown is such an avatar of emotional integrity in a way that is profound leadership for the collective. Becoming willing to feel and then learning how to, because it actually is a skill set that a lot of us are trained out of. And additionally, I would say that there's a spectrum of practices, and meditation and mindfulness is in that spectrum. Work with plant medicine is in that spectrum, that help kind of crack through the unconscious blocks to feeling, so that we can get to deeper emotional integrity, which is emotion, energy in motion. It's energy that wants to move. One of the most beautiful framings of that is a Native American, not attributed to a particular tribe, quote, that is, "The soul would have no rainbows if the eyes had no tears." It's that sits on my bathroom wall next to my bathroom mirror as a reminder that is daily for me too. It's such a, I would say emotional integrity is a day-to-day practice too. Because we're the river and the river gets stuck and we have to undam the river over and over and over again. It also is importantly distinct from like kind of liberating emotion without responsibility. Emotional integrity is deeply self-responsible, both for oneself and for the impacts of your emotions on others. And so that's key to that development.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And what I'm hearing in what you just shared, Samantha, is that you hold emotion as more than just an expression of a need, met or unmet need. It's much broader than that, and I really appreciate that.
I authentically see unarmored emotion as the rudder for the soul.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot there for you to respond to, Mirabai. The original inquiry was around what are your practices on a daily basis, but I'd love to hear that and any thoughts or reflections on what Samantha shared.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Samantha. We are so deeply aligned. It's really exciting to meet you and to hear what's on your heart and what you're sharing with the world. I will say what my practices are, because I do think that helps, sort of like stories, what are your actual tools in your toolbox on a daily basis. So I would say I am a contemplative by nature, meaning it's very easy for me to turn inward, much harder for me to be in activist spaces. And that's why I really push myself to do so, to come out of the cave and off the cushion. It takes a tremendous effort, and I exert that effort every day. But I do begin every day in a contemplative space, literally on the cushion. Well, actually, first I do yoga every day, on my own or at the studio. I alternate, but every single day I move my body in harmony with my breath, and that is vital. And I've been doing that since I was 14. So, and I'm 62. So my whole body has formed around this daily practice. That is vital for me to stay embodied, because it's also easy for me to just go off into the stratosphere of my mind. And then I sit, and even though I'm very busy dismantling religion and religiosity, I have spent my life since early teens immersed in numerous world religions. I mean, immersed in practice and study. So Hinduism, all the flavors of Buddhism, from Vipassana to Tibetan Buddhism to Zen, Sufism, the mystical expression of Islam, Jewish mysticism, and Christian mysticism are my primary paths. And so even though I'm very curious about where those traditions are mired in unhelpful patriarchal, hierarchical, stratified, calcified structures and taking them apart very publicly, starting with myself. I also am not interested in squandering the beauty and the power and the insight and the life-giving peacemaking medicine that lies at the heart of all the world's great wisdom ways. So I'm interested in rescuing and lifting up, excavating and lifting up the jewels, which usually lie, I find, in the mystical spaces of the world's religions. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. So I weave that into my daily practice, in my meditation. I do japa on my mala, or I do zikr on my tasbih, and I read sacred poetry every single day. And these are all the waters that soften the ground of my heart, so that then I can step into my day available. Also, like you, Samantha, hiking. I mean, I live in, and you know, Tom, from having lived here in Taos, we literally live right next to National Forest here in Talpa. And I have two big, beautiful dogs. So every day, as a writer, this is vital. I have to get off my ass, out the door, and into the high desert on a daily basis. And I don't do electronics. I don't catch up on my, messages. I just try to be present with our mother, the earth, every day. And I write for a living. God, I'm so lucky. I get to really work with all of these ideas and the poetry of life on a daily basis. I feel so blessed.
I love, Samantha, you bringing dance into your practice, and Mirabai, you bringing poetry into your practice. And both of those are things that we often don't think about, just all of the ways we can be present in the moment. And I love that you both have so many opportunities and have found different ways to be present from moment to moment and appreciate. And just want to thank you both for sharing your daily practices and what you've used in your life to remind yourself. And each of the people in your daily lives who get to benefit from who each of you are and how you're showing up. It's a beautiful gift.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm wondering again if there's anything more when you think about the evolution or devolution or the future of spirituality. What if there's anything there else that we haven't spoken to that you want to bring into the conversation today?
I could offer a few things. The realization of interbeing, which has been spoken to. I think the play that I'm interested in, that I'm making, is that there's an evolution of the towards the recognition of the non-separation of spirit and matter, the non-separation of spirit and biology and spirit and ecology, the recognizing life itself as sacred, and as God, as divine. And that would be sort of the meta layer. And then a lot of the last number of years of my spiritual journey has been very deeply bound into various indigenous traditions. And this kind of idea that the highest expression of what we are as spiritual beings is to tend and praise the creation. And the tool set that I've been exploring is, I've been exploring ways of working with specifically Tibetan Buddhist practices to increase the fidelity with which I meet other, rather than as awareness meeting awareness, or as liveliness meeting liveliness, as uniqueness meeting uniqueness. I'm looking out at the tree outside my window because we have a very deep relationship around each other's uniqueness, each other's suchness, and that there's a grounding into relationship that is a skill set of recognition of uniqueness, the unique soul in each thing, and the relationship between all of our souls that is singing together. And the practice of attuning to oneself and attuning to other, both human and more than human other, and the practice of communing. So once you've recognized and once you've attuned, you can commune. And that we can do that with anything, like with the little glass of water that I have in front of my ancestor altar, like actually communing with the connection with my ancestors via that water and offering water to their spirits, recognizing that there's molecules in that cup that were in their bodies. You know, like these practices are both, they're intellectual, and then they blossom into realization of the connective fabric of the divine flowing through everything. And so that's kind of my commitment in what I think of as a neo-indigenous toolbox of a re-indigenation into our bodies and into Earth as a place that is holy, and all the specific places we occupy. The other thing I would add to that hasn't been named is the practice of reconnecting with the indigenous intelligence of the places we occupy, and elevating the indigenous existing indigenous voices and names and stewardship practices of those places. And that's actually that's a key, in my view, to the possibility of a civilizational emergence. That there are things to be healed there that also are in the indigenous histories of our religions, that actually need to be brought forward in terms of how they relate to place. I think that's what's playing out in Gaza and in Israel as well, is this unresolved, deeply, deeply broken history of indigeneity. And so that is like the hottest pain point, that you could recognize that that's going on everywhere on some level, and needs to be recognized and named and moved towards. And one of the practices in that is the like really humbling practice of building relationships with people and being in listening, assuming that there are indigenous stewards who still exist for whatever place that you are, and then trying to find them and trying to build relationships. It's very humbling community work, and it's completely worth it.
How about for you, Mirabai? Any other thoughts arising around your honoring your spiritual being and your practices?
Well, I appreciate, Samantha, the naming of the presence of the ancestors. That's kind of a newer practice for me in the last few years, of reclaiming my connection to the ones who have come before me and who are available to me and to us all, even if only through the channel of what Ram Dass, my lifelong friend and teacher, called our holy imagination. You know, that we can forge intimacy, connection with the wisdom keepers of the past, who are in our own genetic lineages or adoptive lineages, and both, and also our spiritual lineages, in my case, multiple lineages, the spiritual teachers that surround us and are available to us. So I've always pictured this kind of circle, wing to wing, of the invisible ones who I call the ancestors, and to whom I also, Samantha, offer make offering. And that they're my team. I call them my spirit team. And they also consist of loved ones who have died, including my child, who I recognized early on after her death had, by virtue of dying, become my ancestor. And we switched roles in that sense. And she has continued to be a guide on my path. And just as, Tom, we were talking about evolution as being bigger than just a linear kind of trajectory, I also see the ancestors as being bigger than linear time. And that helped to have a child take her place in my ancestral community. Because I also see the ancestors as the ones yet to be born. This circle of beings who guide me and help me figure out how to step up and be of service in our beautiful broken world. Tikkun olam is the Hebrew term. You know, my genetic heritage is Jewish, and tikkun olam, as many of you know, is the Hebrew word for repairing the world. And it is in the mystical teachings, that's what we're here to do, is to mend the torn fabric of this world. And the ancestors help if we call on them.
Yeah, I renegotiated my contract with my ancestors a couple of years ago because I realized that they couldn't help unless I asked them. So I just renegotiated the contract to let them know they had permission to intervene at any time because of my limited capabilities as a human being. And it's been a helpful renegotiation.
Very nice. Good. Ramdas would approve.
Well, what I just on a personal level, one of the things I really appreciate about both of you is I entered 2024 with my annual practice of setting intention for the new year, and my intention for 2024 is to find the right balance between my spiritual life and my 3D world, and you both are giving me lots of gifts on how I find that balance in my daily life. And I just want to honor and thank you both for sharing, not just with me personally, but with each other and the audience that's with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Samantha.
It's
my
so
new
nice
soul
to meet
sister.
you.
The other piece I wanted to speak to briefly is just both of you talking about the land and honoring the land. And, you know, I've had the gift of, you know, living where you are now, Samantha. I hiked Mount Tamalpais every day and honored the redwoods and the mountain there. And Mirabai, when I first moved to Taos, literally the first thing I did was to go to the Pueblo with sage and tobacco, and did a ceremony in honoring of the mountain and the land and asked for permission to be there. And it's something we've lost in our culture of that spiritual connection in addition to the physical connection with the land and the spirits and the ancestors. And so it's just a beautiful reminder from both of you about the importance of the beauty we're surrounded by, the teachers, the connection to the land. And I just want to thank you both for that as well.
Thank you.
So I'd like to invite Jim back into our conversation as we close out the program today, and just a huge thank you to you both for who you are in the world, how you're showing up, and the gifts that you've brought with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Mirabai. Hi, Samantha. Thank you both so much. What I'd like to, oops, we lost them.
Yeah, Samantha, Mirabai, please stay on.
Did we lose Mirabai?
I'm not sure.
I know Mirabai needed to go teach to a large class, so perhaps it's possible she had to pop off. I don't know.
Oh, okay, because I was going to start with her, but let's dive in anyway. I was wanting to further explore Mirabai's notion that the Western European, oh, there she is. We thought maybe we
Sorry.
lost you.
No, I just, the dogs are scratching at the door. I couldn't stand it anymore. They're here now.
Yeah, they're
Sorry,
welcome to be
excuse
with
me.
you.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to start with a comment that you made, Mirabai, which I think is far more important than we in the Western world currently imagine. And that is that our secular notion of evolutionary theory and the Darwinian notion of, random selection and so forth and so on, which we consider so fundamentally true, it's hard for us, even though we acknowledge it's only a theory, to countenance any other interpretive framework for the world. And so I just wanted to thank you for bringing that into question. And I'd love to have both of you talk more about the prevailing cosmological worldview of the rest of the world, essentially. That we are not caught up in a linear progression, but we're caught up in cyclic patterns. What Nietzsche called the myth of the eternal return. And one of the reasons why I wanted to raise this is because when one considers the cyclic patterns, one begins to understand what I think most of us intuit, but which the evolutionary theory doesn't allow for. And that is, the circles within circles within circles within circles, and that we can be caught in cycles that we don't even know about. For example, Carl Jung had asserted during the last century in his works that we're at the end of the age of Pisces in a zodiac that lasts for 25,000 years. It goes round and round and round. And we're at the end of the age of Pisces, which means essentially the end of the age of Christianity. And that completion of that cycle, that sign, that house in the zodiac, has more to do with current events than anything we're thinking about as we elect a president or we go fight somebody somewhere. That it's in fact the cyclic patterns that are causative, and one would then obviously extrapolate out to the astrology of the pattern. So I'd just love to have both of you just comment on this notion of cyclic patterns as opposed to linear evolution, because I think it's fundamental.
I feel like that's much more your realm, Samantha. So I'll just touch very briefly on it and then hand it over. So I'm thinking again about my work with grief as a spiritual path and grieving people. And I have identified 12 what I call thresholds in the landscape of loss. So picturing the human predicament, again, as Ram Dass called it, as a wilderness, as a wild space, but that there are these sort of resting places, these places of refuge, these universal features in that landscape where people can find themselves in each other, outrage or inquiry or shattering or grace, or any of these 12 spaces that I see as being universal. Places where we gather, people of very diverse experiences of loss. But this whole framework is predicated on the understanding that grief is not a linear path It's not a checklist, because it's not a pathological condition that you have to get through and be done, get on the other side and be over it. It's a lifelong, as Andrew Harvey says, unfolding adventure. But there is an evolutionary element in that we cycle back through these various spaces of fearlessness and beloved community, and all of these different elements of the grief, the holy grief path, again and again. And each time we're more deeply integrated and I hope more fully alive and available to life itself. And so I see that as an example of the cyclical nature of spiritual growth that you're speaking of. And I hope that that can map on to our communal, collective, global evolution.
Thank you. Yeah, the topography of grief is a beautiful concept, as a resting place in the wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Samantha.
I'm really loving receiving grief as a haul-on, in a sense, for the larger cyclical conversation. The 25,000-year cycle is a very interesting context for what we're going through right now. And then, I mean, the way there's so many different kind of layers on layers that one could look at the cyclical nature of what's occurring right now, like starting from a question of like, how big is the arc that we're in right now in terms of a civilizational transition? Is it a 26,000-year arc that started with other civilizations that have been completely forgotten? Is it the kind of epochal shift that shifted with the beginning of the agrarian age? Is it what kind of epochal shift are we in right now, and at what time scale? I think is a really interesting question and an important one. I think it's important mostly in terms of like the psychology of how deeply we receive the level of shift that we're in. I'm also not sure that that's separate from Darwin's concept of fitness, that there's a way in which fitness is actually bound to the cyclical moment. and that connection between a conversation about what is really the nature of fitness and adaptation and selection relative to context, that those two things come together in a really exquisite way, and that within the cyclical arcs that we're nested inside of, that what is adaptive shifts relative to that larger context, and there's a synthesis with Darwin there that I think is useful. The linear concept would be a patriarchal reading of Darwin, which Spencer Herbert took care of with social Darwinism, but actual Darwinism is a good fit to discuss how to be within the cyclical nature of time. So I don't have a set answer for where we are. I think we're at an epochal shift that is at least as great as the shift from pre-agrarian to agrarian age, defined by planetary boundaries and the fact that we can no longer engage technological adolescence and survive. That existential tech combined with ecological limits provide a crucible that is epochal in a very particular way. I think that is a key in the whole conversation, always, and that's always operating on us unconsciously.
Yeah. This, I was thinking, of Rick Tarnas's great work, Cosmos and Psyche, where he goes back 2,500 years and shows how as the planets go round and round and round, human culture, even human technology. I'm mindful of the solar flares going on this week, actually, very intense solar flares as as the sun comes to its climax in its 11-year cycle in the summer of 2025, and the corollaries between these cyclic patterns of the sun and human behavior, human brilliance, human violence, human intensity, I would say, is reaching a crescendo. Just tracking the cyclic patterns of the sun, to say nothing about that pattern within a 25,000-year cycle of the zodiac. So anyway, not to belabor it, but I just think, Mirabai, that comment was worth further elucidation, because I think it's more and more helpful in actually understanding our current predicament than we might think. And I would think, if you've read the book The Fourth Turning, about the cycles inside American history, that there's as they go back over the 250 years, they see patterns of 80 year cycles. And knowing where we are in that cycle, at least to my mind, is extremely helpful in understanding how one should be in the overall scheme of things. But let me just turn to one other area, and that is having to do with both of your comments on evolution and devolution. And I'm just wondering how you understand those two interactive phenomena within the context of the human psyche, and whether you believe that in the human psyche, is it a level playing field between the evolution and the devolution, or do you subscribe to the notion prevalent in Eastern spirituality, and certainly in Christian theology, of sort of some kind of a veil of illusion, as the Hindus would call it, or original sin, that we humans aren't quite balanced, that there's something off, and that offness influences our relationship between evolution and devolution. Start with you, Samantha. You've done a lot of work on the psyche.
Do we really only have 5 minutes left?
We just went can of worms.
5 minutes, right? Okay, you have 2.5, Samantha, go.
Okay, I'll work that. I mean, I think original sin is one of the most toxic narratives that has ever been insinuated on humanity, to be frank. And I think we're extremely plastic relative to the stories we tell about ourselves. I also think simultaneously we're dealing with epigenetic histories that last that have a very, very long tail, and cultural memories and mythopoetics that have very long tails. But I think the play that's worth playing in terms of evolution and devolution is to recognize, I think if we want to continue, we have to look at where our myths are zero-sum myths. Like our myths, many of the myths that we're living out imply a chosen people or a not chosen people. They imply that someone needs to win and everyone else on physical terms actually just needs to lose or die, or and I think that's the piece that we actually need to reckon with at a very large scale with the world's religious leaders in a very frank way, if we want to persist. And I think that's an opportunity in this community that needs to be brought to the world's religions in a very earnest way. And unpacked in terms of where we're carrying that, and where that recapitulates epigenetic and systemic trauma. and the relationship between those things. I think that was less than 2.5 minutes.
No, but it's very, very important, particularly in terms of what's happening in Gaza. It's happening because of the stories. There's
Absolutely.
an Israeli
And
storyline.
where else that there's conflict,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the African conflicts that are occurring right now,
Yeah.
displacement that's occurring, it's all tribal warfare reified by collective spiritual and political and tribal narrative.
Yeah, we're well worth further pondering for sure. Mirabai, any closing words you'd like to make on this topic or anything else?
Yeah, I think that the where this plays out in the religions of the world is in the dangerous sphere of purification and perfection. And that, again, very masculinized paradigm that there is some kind of end result of our spiritual paths where we're going to be finished. Personal salvation, personal enlightenment or awakening are very dangerous goals that are threaded into the very fabric of the world's religions, and I think result in this kind of incredible power imbalance that is creating such suffering in the world. So this is a whole other conversation, and I'd really love to have it. And again, I keep coming back to the whole notion of grief as a spiritual path, because it's not finished. You don't get through it and there's some kind of perfection at the end. There is a deeper integration with aliveness and a taking of our rightful place in the web of interbeing that the human condition invites us into when we say yes to it, when we show up for it. And so I think our evolution is integral to that dismantling of perfection and purification.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Tom, closing word?
Jim, you've heard me share this before. I spend hours and hours putting weeks like this one together. And they're the things that I plan, and then there are the gifts that show up. And the two of you today have been such a wonderful gift. And I just want to honor and thank you both for being with us and helping us close out a fantastic week on spirituality and conscious leadership. So a big thank you to the both of you for who you are, and so grateful you're here today, and would welcome you back again for additional conversations.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom.
you, Tom. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Mirabai. That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder for today. Then we'll see you all again on Monday for another week of Humanity Rising. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you all.